So what we learned yesterday was as follows. Oh, but before we talk about what we learned yesterday, today is two big yard sites. Today's the yard site of someone who does not. I don't think there's a Jew in the world who hasn't benefited from a Vavajim Bartanura. Today was his yard site. He wrote Parish of Mishnais. I don't think anybody ever learned Mishnais without using his parish. Even if you used Art Scroll, even if you use the Kahati, it's all based on the Bartanura. So his neshama should have an aliyah, and it should be he should be male to Yosy and Klal Yisrael. It's also the yahrzeit. It's also the yahrzeit of the famous Minchas Aluzer, Chaim Aluzer Shapira, the Minkach Rebbe. He was the young Rebbe in my Shver's eyes, because my Shver was by the Dark Tshuva, who was his father, and the Minchas Aluzer was the young one. And there's a famous video that's easily accessible on YouTube, where there was a big wedding, and there were American cameras there. So the Minchas Aluzer had an opportunity to grab the spotlight and to have a chance to talk to Eden in America. So most people have seen the video. He looks up to the video and says, Eden in America, Daf Hiten Shabbos. So it's a beautiful video. If you haven't seen it, it's good to go to YouTube and look it up. Okay, so let's see where we're holding. So yesterday, we started with an observation in the Mishnah that in the morning, when the Kohen changed out of his regular clothing into his big day kahuna, the Mishnah mentions that he toivels and he does kiddush yadayim raglayim once. And the Gemara argued that this proves that the Mishnah is not following the Shita of Rav Meir, rather the Mishnah is following the Shita of the Rabbanim. And for the next blot, we're going to literally chew through the sugya and find different mekayris for these halachas. So let's talk about what the halachas are. So in our picture, I have a picture on the screen that shows on the right side, there's a picture of the Kohen Hedyot helping the Kohen Gadol with Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and the Kohen Gadol is wearing his big day zahav. And then there's a mikveh. So the first scene in this set of scenes it's a set of scenes. There are three scenes in the set. The first scene is the Kohen Gadol doing Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. The second scene is the Kohen Gadol in front of the mikveh. The picture that I have doesn't show anybody in the mikveh, not to worry. He's fully dressed before he went into the mikveh. And then the third scene is once again the Kohen Gadol changed into his big day lavan, and now he's doing Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim again. So this scene is a scene that discusses not the first clothing change of the day, which was changing from his weekday clothing, from his personal clothing into the big day zav, but it's referring to the second transition when he's changing out of his big day zav and into his big day lavan. And there's a machlokes between Rav Meir and the Rabbanan how this was done. According to Rav Meir, he came in his big day zahav while he was, and then after he took his big day zahav off, and he was not dressed, and he was ready to go into the mikvah. At that point, you made kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Then he went into the mikvah. Then he came out of the mikvah and he got dressed into his big day lavan, and then he made kiddush yadayim v'raglayim again. So the first time he made kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, he was not dressed. It was after he got undressed. And the second time he did kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, it was after he got dressed. So he was dressed when he had kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. And the Chachamim learned that that's not the way it was done. The way it was done is that the first Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim was done before he got undressed, and the second Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim was done after he got dressed. So where does it chapa nafkamina? The chapa nafkamina as follows. According to Rav Meir, both Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim were done after the first set of clothing were taken off, which means, according to Rav Meir, how the Gemara understands it, is that both Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim are connected to putting on the new clothing. Because if you first made Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim after you took off your original set of clothing, clearly the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim doesn't have to do with that old clothing. It has to do with the new clothing. So in fact, there's going to be two Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim that's going to service putting on the new set of clothing. One will be before you went to the mikveh, and then one will be after you came out of the mikveh and you got dressed. There'll be another one after you're fully dressed. That's how Reb Meir lives. If that's the case, if both of the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim are associated with the new pair of clothing that you're going to put on, so let's look at the very first change of the day, when the Kohen Gadol changed out of his own personal clothing into the Big Day Zov. If the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim is associated with his old clothing, well, then he wouldn't make Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim the first time, because the old clothing are not Big Day Kodesh, they're his own personal clothing. But if both of the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim in every transition are connected to the new clothing, well, then even the first time he changes out of the street clothing, he should still make Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim twice, because it's connected to the clothing that he's going to put on. Our Mishnah says that he only makes Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim once when he is taking off his street clothing. So that clearly is up to Gemara, supports the sheet of the Rabbanan, who holds that the first Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim, normally when they were changing from Big Zav to Big Love and vice versa, was before he took off his clothing, meaning it's connected to the old clothing. Since it's connected to the old clothing, when you change from your street clothing into Big Day Kahuna, you would delete the first Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim, because your street clothing do not require a Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim. And Reb Meir would disagree with it. So that's what we learned yesterday. We also learned yesterday the Makar. Why is it that the Rabbanan hold one way and the Reb Meir holds the other way? And the Makar was from a pasuk. There's a pasuk that talks about taking your clothing off. Then there's Rechitza, and then there's Velovash. And we're going to go through the parasha shortly, but first we'll just focus on these two psukim, which says Uba Iron al Oil Moedu Pasha Big Day Blood. So it talks about taking off his clothing. Asher Lovash Vavoy Kodesh. And then there's Varachas Besarai, meaning there's a Rechitza, which we're learning at this point, which clearly Reb Meir and the Rabban are both learning. This Rechitza is not referring to Tefillah, rather it's referring to Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim, which in and of itself needs explanation. And then it says Velovash. So both Reb Meir and Rabban are learning that there's a similarity between the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim that's done by the undressing, by the Upashat, to the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim that's done by the Velovash. And Reb Meir learns that just like by the Velovash, when do you do the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim? After the act, after you're dressed. So too, when you're getting undressed, when would you do the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim? After you're undressed. And that's why Reb Meir learned that the first Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim was after you got undressed. The Rabbani said, we compare the two, but we take a different perspective. And we say, just like when he made the second Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim, he was already dressed, he was not naked. So too, when he does the first Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim, he should be dressed, which means he'll have to do the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim before he gets undressed. And that's how we finished off yesterday. So we to make things clear, we know the rule that there were 5 tefillas. Each tefillah was accompanied by 2 Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim. So there were a total of 10 Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim. And we learned the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Rabbanon. How did they do the Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim? Was the first Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim when the Kohen was dressed, or did it occur when he was undressed? Both Reb Meir and the Rabbanon agree that the second Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim was done when the Kohen was dressed. So that's the machlokes that we had yesterday. So that takes us to the next point before we start the Gemara. The Gemara wants to identify when these 10 Kiddush Yadayim Verglayim were. So I'm going to change the scene to the 5 different modes that the Kohen Gadol was in, which means first thing in the morning he put on his big day Zahav to do the regular daily avodas. Then he changed into the big day Lavan to do the special Yom Kippur avodas. Then once again he changed into the big day Zahav to do the 2 carbon chatas, which was like the Musafim, which was once again done in the big day Zahav. Then he changed into the big eleven for one purpose only, and that was to go back into the Kodesh Kodeshim to remove the kaf and the machta that he left from when he was makter first. Then he changed back again into his big dezov to do the Talmud Shabbat Harbayim. So let's have a look. There are 5 tefillas. The first tefillah we said was out of the Azara before he came into the Azara. And then before each change, there was an additional tefillah. So there's your 10 tefillahs. Let's see where you have, those are 5 tefillahs. Let's see where you have your 10 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So we already said that according to Reb Meir, when you changed out of your street clothing into the big day Zahav, there were 2 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. In other words, Reb Meir argues on our Mishnah. But according to Reb Meir, it makes perfect sense. When he changed into the big day Zahav the first time, there were 2. When he changed into the big day Lavan the first time, there's 4. When he changes once again into the big day Zahav, it's 6. When he changed back to the big day Lavan, it's 8. And when he changed back to the big Zahav, it's 10. 2 times 5 is 10. Very simple. But the problem is, according to the Chum, we said that when he changed originally from his street clothing into his big day Zahav, he only did 1 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So now we're missing 1. So you only have 9. And that's the first question that the Gemara deals with. And the Gemara ends up saying is that you're right. You're missing 1 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim because when he was changing out of his street clothing, he didn't do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. But let's look at the end of the day. When he changed out of his big dezov all the way at the end of the day to change back into his street clothing, there he made Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim again. So the 10th one is actually going to be after he takes off his big day zov at the end of the day. And that's the first Gemara that we're going to discuss. And then we'll get into the next section. So what I'm going to do is, we're all the way at the bottom of Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, the very last line. And I'm going to bring up my Gemara now, and we'll get started. Victor's here, and Bensie's here, and Paul's here, and Frank is here. Baltic. Okay, so here we go. I'm trying. So all the way at the bottom of the Amud. Bishlam of Reb Meir. According to Reb Meir, like we just discussed, Hani de Mishkachasla, and now we're going to go on to Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Hani de Mishkachasla Asar Kedushin. How do you have 10 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim? Very simple, because each Tevilah was accompanied by 2 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Elul Rabbanan, who learns in our Mishnah, and our Mishnah clearly deletes the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim by the first Tevilah, Tisha. Now I'm only left with 9 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So Amalach Rabbanan, Kiddush Basra, the last of the 10 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim that you do, that the Kohen Gadol does on Yom Kippur, is Kipashet Big Day Kodesh, V'Lovish Big Day Chayil. When he takes off his Big Day Kodesh, before he takes off his Big Day Kodesh, the Rabbanan hold he had to do a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim over Lahasam. So that's where you have the sum total of 10. Okay. The next thing that we're going to discuss is, we discussed earlier, I'm going to go back to the picture because it becomes very, very relevant, and it'll be much easier to understand what we're talking about. If you think about it, it's very unusual because when the Kohen Gadol went back into the base Kodesh HaKodeshim, he only went for one reason only, to take out the Kaf Machta. So the question is, why did he have to make a special trip back in? Why didn't he just take it out when he brought it in? So the most pashut answer is very simple. It's full of ketayos, the smoke there. He has to wait till all the ketayos burns out. So that's why he had to leave it there. And then he got involved with another avoid. They couldn't wait there because the kohen was very busy that day. That's why he had to come back in. The problem is that when you look at the order of the psukim, and we'll review that shortly, although in our picture we're showing that after he did the avodah, after he put the ketayos in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, he left the Kodesh HaKodeshim, he abandoned the kaf and the machta there, and he changed back into his big day zov, and he put on, and he brought his island, the 2 korban chatas, which were like the musaf. And then when he was done with that, he went back. The problem is, if you look at the psukim doesn't show that. If you learn the psukim inside, which we'll look at together, the psukim show that he took out the kapu machta before he was being makriv his ayil, and which was the carbon chatas of the day. So if that's the case, why is it that we learn that he did the ayil before he went into the Kodesh HaKodeshim to take out the kapu machta? The pasuk says it the opposite way. The pasuk says that first he went and take the kapu machta, and only then did he bring the ayil and ayil. That's what the Gemara challenges. Is why is it that we're interpreting the order of how he did avoidus differently from the order that's shown in the Torah? And the Gemara is going to answer very, very simple. We have this rule that he had to toivel 5 times because there were 4 transitions of clothing. He started with big Zov, he went to Lavan, back to Zov, back to Lavan, back to Zov. But if he would have done the avoidus together, in other words, if while he was there at the Kodesh Kodeshim, he would have waited and taken out the kafu machta and wouldn't have had to come back in there a second time. So then I'm taking you to another picture that shows what would have been. It means at the beginning of the day, he would start it off with his big day Zov to do the carbon tummy. Then in one shot, he would have done all of the Vodas Pnim in his big day Lavan. And then he could have changed out of his big day Lavan to do the rest of that Vodas, and he would have never had to change back to big day Lavan. So instead of changing 4 times, he would have only changed twice, which means instead of having 5 tefillas and 10 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, he would only need to have 3 tefillas. 1 before he puts on the big day Zov at the beginning of the day, 1 when he changed from the big day Zov into the big day Lavan to do all of the avoidance inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and then a third time when he transfers back into the big day Zov to finish out the day. And you wouldn't have 5 tefillas, you'd only have 3 tefillas. So since we know from somewhere that there has to be 5 tefillas, since we know them from somewhere, it must be that he transitioned in and out of the big day love on the second time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because the whole question wouldn't start. You might as well have a second plain total.
I hear.
And you don't have to change, or 5 could have them gedolim, so you don't have to change at all.
I hear. Okay, so let's see the pasuk inside, because the Gemara is going to make a point that the Torah, when it tells us what was done, the order of operations on Yom Kippur, it was actually completely in order, except for this one anomaly where it discusses the chatas and going into the base Kodesh HaKodeshim. There it's a little bit off. So if we look at the psukim, it starts off talking about going into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, which means that it's a given that the Kohen, before he starts for the day, he puts on his big bezov and he brings the Tamid Shal Shachris, and he takes care of the menorah and he takes care of the Ketores, which are the normal routine. Then it says, V'zois Yavei Aaron ala Kodesh, and these are the avodas that he did with Nim in his big day Lavan, and lists off, he brought a par, and it says, in order to do that, he has to wear the Kshanis Bad Yilbosh. He has to put on big day Lavan. So it says, Kshanis Bad Yilbosh, U'michlis Bad Yu al Basarai, V'avnit Bad Yach. So this is introducing him starting the avodas from the Nim. And then he says, when you put on this Kshanis Bad, when you put on your white clothing, you also have to go to the mikveh. So this is going to be, according to one shita, the makar of the tefillah, because it says when you put on the big day lavan, you have to go to the mikveh. The Gemara is going to say, okay, very good. You see from here, when you put on the big day lavan, you got to go to the mikveh. But how do you know when you take off the big day lavan and put on the big day zav, who said you have to go to the mikveh there again? Which the Gemara is going to deal with. Anyway, then the Gemara goes on and talks about all of the karbanis. They're brought, the 2 seirim, the Lashem, the Lazazel. These are all the avodas that were done by the Kohen Gadol in his big day Lavan, part of his Yom Kippur services. It goes through all things. It goes through the animals that he brings, and then it goes to the which talks about the Ketores that he brought in. And after the Ketores, he went and spritzed blood. These were all the avodas done in the big day Lavan of Na'ilafnim. Then it says, Uba Aaron El Oil Moed, which is very strange because until now, the last 10 psukim, that's all we've been talking about is the avodah that Aaron is doing in the Oil Moed. So why did it say again Uba Aaron El Oil Moed? So the Gemara is going to teach us that this Uba Aaron is when he came back to take out the machta and the kaf from the Ketores, when he came to retrieve it. So it says when Aaron goes in, then he takes off the big love. So after he finishes the last thing that he had to do in the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim, which was to retrieve the Kaf and Machta, then he takes off his big day love. Then the next pasuk says, "Barachat is b'sar b'mayim b'machim kodesh v'lovish is b'gadav," which is the big day zav. V'yotza es eilosoi v'es ha'om, which were the two elim that he brought. So if you look at the order of the psukim, it seems that he did all of the avodas in the big day love and lafnai lafnim. He did them all in one shot, including removing the kaf and machta, and only after that he switched back into the big day zav to bring the chatos. We know that's not true. We know he actually brought the chatos in the big day zav before he went back in to the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim to retrieve the kaf and machta. And that's what the Gemara is going to be discussing right now. Tanu Rabbanu. We learned the pasuk Uva Aaron El Oil Mohid, and we learned what is he going in for? Lama Huva Eino Iba Elo Lahitzia Kafas Amachta. The only thing that he could go for, because the Torah already lists up all of the avodas that he does there. So what else is he going for? The Torah doesn't expressly state the purpose of the Kohen Gadol coming once again to the Oil Mohid. So we learn that he went in to retrieve the Kaf and Machta that he had left there earlier. Now, what's strange, Dr. Bryce, is Shekola Parsha Kula Nemer Ala Seder. If you look at, like we just went through, the Parsha in Achrei Mois is chronologically perfect, explaining exactly the order of how things were done. Except for this last pasuk of Avo Aaron, it's out of order because it really should have been after the following pasuk that talks about the chatois that the Kohen Gadol brought. So these last two psukim are out of order. My timer. How do I know that you're out of order? Omar Bchista, Gemiri, we know halacha l'moishim Sinai, that chomesh tvilois v'asar kedushin toivel kohen gadol mekalish b'yoyim. We know that the kohen gadol did 5 tvilois and 10 kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and that's because he's switching back from the zav to the lavan to the zav to the lavan to the zav. The Ika Sidron, if he was able to take out the kafu machta after he put it in, remaining in his big day lavan, because he didn't have any other avoid to do in between, well then then there was only one change from zav to lavan, and then one change back from lavan to zav, which means you'd be missing 2 tefillas and 4 kedushin. So that's how we know for sure that the pasuk is out of order, and in fact, the kafu machta, the retrieval of the kafu machta, was done only after he changed back into his big day zav and brought the 2 elim, and then he had to change back into the big day lavan to go retrieve the kafu machta. So there's a long choices that offers up other transitions that could have been used for the tefillah, but of course the Gemara blibes maskana that the extra reason why he went back to Uva Kohen was to go and retrieve the kafu machta. So now we know we have certain things we know as a given. We know there are 5 tefillas, and we know there are 10 kedoshim. Where do you know it from? So far, all we have is the pasuk, of upashat v'rachatz v'lovash that we had yesterday. That Rav Meir and Rabbanan had a dispute about how to interpret, and that was and their dispute was around the first Kiddush Dayim V'Raglayim. Was it done before the Kohen Gadol took off his begodim, or was it done after he took off his begodim? They both agree, Rav Meir and Rabbanan agree that the new begodim that he put on, the Kiddush Dayim V'Raglayim, was for sure before. For sure before that. So let's see what the Gemara says. Tanya, Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Minayin. I'm sorry. They both agree that the Levisha preceded the Kiddush Dayim V'Raglayim. So when he got dressed, he only did the Kiddush Dayim V'Raglayim after he got dressed. Everybody agrees to that. So Tanya Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Minayin l'chamesh tfilos v'asar kedoshin shetoivel kohen gadol mekalish b'yoyim. How do you know that there are 5 tevilas and there was 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? So we're going to focus first on the 5 tevilas. How do you know there are 5 tevilas? Talmud Loimer, it says in the pasuk, Uba Aharon El Oil Moed, which is the same pasuk that we discussed. Rav Meir and the Rabbanan were arguing about, which is referring to the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. But Rabbi Yehuda here is using this pasuk referring to the tevilas. So you see right away, until now with Reb Meir and Rabbanon, we were learning this pasuk was talking about Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Rabbi Yehuda takes the pasuk at face value and learns that it's referring to the tefillas, which means Rabbi Yehuda is going to have some other way to learn about the Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, which the Gemara will deal with later. But in the meantime, he takes off his big day lavan, he goes to the mikveh b'makom kadosh, and then v'lavash is begodim, then he puts on the big day zav, the yotzavas. You see from here that whenever he changes from the avodah of big day lavan to the avodah of big day zav, ton tvila, he has to toivel. So clearly, Rabbi Yehuda is learning this pasuk is not talking about Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, it's talking about toiveling in the mikveh. Omer Rebbe. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's makar. Rabbi Yehuda's makar is the same pasuk that Rabbi Meir under Rabbanan used earlier to prove their point regarding Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. He's using this pasuk to talk about tefillah, which means he completely disagrees with Rabbi Meir under Rabbanan, and he's going to have a different pasuk to teach us about Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Omer Rebbe had a different makar for the tefillah. Rebbe used a different pasuk, which means if Rebbe uses a different pasuk to teach him about tefillah, then he could agree with Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan, and he could use Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan's psukim to refer to Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So let's see Rebbe. Rebbe minayin l'chamish tefillas of Ser Kedoshin shetayvel ben Kohen Gadol Makadosh B'Yayim. And once again, we're focusing only on the 5 tefillas. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk much earlier in the parsha, it says Ksaynis bad Kodesh Yilbash. The Kohen has to wear big day lavan. U'michnas bad yol b'saray. U'avnit bad yachbar. U'v'mitznavis bad yitznayv. Big day Kodesh Shem. U'rachatz b'mayim is b'saray u'leveisham. The Torah is describing the very first time he changes into this big day lavan to do all of the avodas b'fnim. And it says in that pasuk, "V'rachatz b'mayim is b'saray." So you clearly see how l'madata shekol ha'mashana me'avoid l'avoida ton tvila. When you change from the big day zav into the big day lavan, you have to toivel. So it's interesting to note in Rabbi Yehuda's example, where Rabbi Yehuda learned that you have to toivel, it was speaking about ufoshadas big day abad. It was referring to when he took off his big day lavan and he was putting on his big day zav. That's the example. That's what the Torah is talking about in the pasuk where Rabbi Yehuda learns tefillah. Interesting enough, in the pasuk where Rabbi learns tefillah, it was when he was taking off his big day zav and putting on his big day lavan. And the Gemara is going to ask, how do you know that you have to toivel the other way around in each case? The Omer, and then mysteriously enough, Rebbe sticks in the Omer big de Kodesh, which is 3 extra words in the pasuk. Hokshu kala begodim kulon zalazeh. It's a shayla if you darshan. Now, at this point, we have no idea what extra information we're learning from big de Kodesh. We will get back to that later. V'chamash avodah. Now we know for each change of avodah or change of begodim, there was a tefillah. Now let's see how many changes of begodim there were. There's Talmud Shel Shachar, like we saw these 5 lined up in the picture earlier. There's the Talmud Shel Shachar, which is done by Big Day Zav. There's the Avodas Hayoyim, the special Avodas Yom Kippur, the special Karbanos, and the Haktaris of Fnai V'Lefnim was done by Big Day Lavat. Then there's the Ailoi V'Ail Ha'om, which was the Chatlas, which is done by Big Day Zav. So that's the 3rd set of Avodas. Then there's returning to retrieve the Kafu Machta, which is the Big Day Lavan, which is the 4th Avodah. And then Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim, once again, is the avodah that's done by Big Day Zav. So since there were 5 different avodas, that meant that there were 5 tefillas. So we've covered the 5 tefillas. Now we need to know, how do you know that there's 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim? Uminayin shekal tefillah utefillah shricha shnei kiddushim. How do you know that there was 2 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim that accompanied each change of clothing? Talmud Loimer upashat v'rochatz v'rochatz v'lovash, which was the same pasuk that Reb Meir and the Rabbanan were arguing about yesterday as to how to interpret it. And clearly, since Rebbe knows Tevila from the pasuk of Ksaynis bat Kodesh Yilbash, he has the pasuk of Barachatz Espesarai, the pasuk of Barachatz Alavish, which also the pashas are speaking about Tefillah, but he's going to apply it to Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, just like Reb Meir and Rabbanan. We know Rabbi Yehuda used that pasuk to tell you Tefillah, so which means he needs to find another way for Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kal V'Chaimer. The way I know that you need to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim by every Tefillah, I don't have a pasuk. I don't have a pasuk for it. I hold like Rabbi Yehuda. I don't have a pasuk for it. I will learn Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim from a Kal V'Chaimer. Madach every other day of the year, where there's no special tvila required to do the avodah. Ton kiddush, you still need to do kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. If a kohen does not do kiddush yadayim v'reglayim, the avodah is possible. If he doesn't toivel, the avodah is not possible like the way. So makom sheton tvila on Yom Kippur, where it's mandatory that he change it, that he toivels before the avodah. Einay din sheton kiddush. Surely it should need kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. If every avodah without tvila needs kiddush yadayim v'reglayim, surely an avodah that requires tvila also requires kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. In fact, the more okay, but that's only one kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. You're saying each tvila is accompanied by two kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. Where did you get that from? Imala halan kiddush echad afkan kiddush echad. From the Kal V'chomer, you only know that one kiddush yadayim v'reglayim is required before avodah. But you're saying there's two per avodah. How do you get that? Talmud Leimer, a whole new pasuk. It says ubo arin al oil moed upashat is big de abod asher lavash. This is the same pasuk that Rebbe was referring to earlier, but now he's focusing on a different aspect of the pasuk. The pasuk says the iron of Kohen should go into oil moed and you take off the clothing that he put on. Why does it have to tell me that he takes off the clothing that he put on? Did you ever take clothing off that you weren't wearing? Obviously, it's the clothing that you're wearing. So why is the pasuk saying pashat and lavash? Because the pasuk wants to tell us one extra tidbit of information, that you treat getting undressed just like we treat getting dressed. Just like the pasuk explicitly says that after he puts on the big day kahuna, the big day lavan, he has to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. How did the Torah say it explicitly? Through a kal v'chomer, right? It's through a kal v'chomer. Af pshita ton kiddush. So too, when you take off the clothing, you also have to have kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So this is very interesting. I only know that Levisha needs kiddush yadayim v'raglayim through a kal v'chomer, and then I'm using a hekesh to apply it. The Tosfos asked, we know there's a rule, something that you learn with a kal v'chomer, you cannot transmit with a hekesh. Zok Tosfos, that only is regarding actual avodas. But this prep work, putting on the begodim, there you're allowed to transmit a chiddush from point A to point B through a hekesh, even though you only know it by point A through a kal v'chomer. Well, you see that a kal v'chomer is considered a bona fide limud. So let's see the Gemara weiter. So now what the Gemara is going to do, so we just quoted Rebbe's approach to how he knows Tvila and Kiddush Yadayim V'Reglayim, and Rabbi Yehuda's approach. But now the Gemara is going to drill down a little bit deeper into these two approaches. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Minayin l'chamish Tvila is basar kedushin shetayvel ben shetayvel chagadol makash b'v'yoyim. We were just quoting the brayso that we learned a little earlier. Tamadoi muvak arin el oil moed v'rachatz es basar b'mayim v'makom kadosh. Halamadata shekol mashalim me'avodah la'avodah time Tvila. This is almost an exact quote of Rabbi Yehuda earlier. Now the Gemara is going to ask a question on that. What was going on over there? He was taking off his big day lavan and he was putting on his big day zav, and that's where the Torah tells you need to be toivel. Ashkam a big day lavan and a big day zav. So the pasuk is clearly talking about a transition from lavan to zav. But in big day zav, big day lavan minayin. How do you know that when you switch the other way around, you also have to toivel? And that's up to Gemara. Tanud Rabbi Shmuel, he tells us a kal v'chomer. Uma big day zav. The big Yisrael aren't so holy. Why? You can't go into the Kodesh HaKodeshim with the big Yisrael. Nevertheless, when you change into a ton tefillah, you have to toivel. So big Yisrael, which are even more Kodesh, surely you should need tefillah. So that's how I know that when you transition both ways, you have to toivel. In fact, it's not a good kal v'chomer. You're right. The big day lavan has a maila that you go to Kodesh HaKodeshim. But there's so many kaparas and so many more avodas that you do with the big day zav. The big day lavan you only do 3 or 4 limited avodas with. So the big day zav is maybe more kodesh, and that's where you have to toivel. Who said you should have to toivel? That's what you're thinking. Who said you have to toivel when you go into the big day lavan? Ela nafkele mid Rebbe. He will learn it from Rebbe. What did Rebbe say? Rebbe learned it from a different pasuk. It says Sonis bat kodesh yilbash. Remember, I pointed out that Rebbe's pasuk was talking about toiveling when you put on the big day lavan. So now you have beautiful. From one pasuk you see when you put on the big day zav, you have to toivel, and from the other pasuk you see when you put on the big day lavan, you have to toivel. So all my bases are covered. The only thing that's not covered according to Rabbi Yehuda is how do you know kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? But that he can use the Kal V'chomer that we discussed from Rabbi Elazar. Now the Gemara is going to drill down in what Rebbe said. Again, it's a direct quote from what we had on Amar Aleph. So the Gemara now turns it around on Rebbe and asks the opposite question. Your pasuk is only telling you when you change from big dezav to big delavan. But how do you know that when you change from big delavan to big dezav minayin that you also need a tefillah? So the Gemara turns it very small. Kal V'chomer. We're going to try to use the same Kal V'chomer. Ma big delavan she'ein kaparas meruba. The same obstacle to the Kal V'chomer we had earlier. Now we're going to use it as a Kal V'chomer. Madach for the big delavan, which doesn't have too many avoiders that you do with it. Nevertheless, Twinin tefillah big dezav shekaparas meruba any dish Twinin tefillah. So of course we already know how the Gemara is going to slug up this Kal V'chomer. Equal mifrach mal big delavan shekenichlas bein lafnai lafnim. Big delavan have a bigger kedusha. Maybe that's why you have to try when you put them on. Hanyu de katani. Now we have the answer to our mystery. At the end of Rebbe's halacha, he's stuck in an extra word. The omer big de kaideshem. We didn't know what those words were telling you. So we learned from the extra words big de kaideshem that all begodim that are kodesh require tefillah. If it's a little more kodesh, if it's a little less kodesh, it doesn't matter. If the begodim have any kedusha at all, you need kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Yet Rebbe clearly doesn't use Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk. Rabbi Yehuda used Rebbe's pasuk to teach you the other way. Rebbe didn't use Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk. He's learning out of big shame that both ways you toivel. That's why he has that pasuk extra to teach you kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. The Gemara goes weiter. The Chamish avodah say. Once again, you do the tally. Once you know each one needs a tefillah, let's see how many avodas there are. The same five avodas like we discussed earlier. And now comes the next step. How do you know that each tefillah needs a kiddush yadayim v'raglayim before and after? On that Talmud Leimer, according to Rebbe, you have this pasuk of upashat v'rachatz v'lovash, which was the same pasuk that we used for Meir and Rabbanan yesterday. And according to Rebbe, I don't need it to teach me tefillah because I already know tefillah. Frankly, more, what do you mean hybrid tefillah? That pasuk, if you read it, it's clearly talking about tefillah. It's not talking about kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. And that Rebbe answers, tefillah, I don't need this pasuk to teach me tefillah. The nafka let me big day kodesh. I already learned from big day kodesh that both ways you need a tefillah. So sure, it talks about tefillah, but I don't need it to teach me tefillah. So we have a rule. Whenever the Torah says something that's not needed, it's extra, you can apply it to something else. Therefore, we'll say that the pasuk of the pasuk v'rachatz v'lovash is referring to kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Frank the Gemara, why didn't the Torah just say what it meant? Why did the Torah say v'rachatz? Why didn't it say pashat v'kiddush v'lovash? If you're talking about kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, say it the way it is. The kiddush. The Torah B'davka expressed kiddush yadayim v'raglayim using the word v'rachatz, which means tefillah. Why? Hakamashmon the tefillah kiddush. The tefillah has to have a similarity to kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Ma kiddush b'makom kadosh. Just like kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is always done in the azara, aftil b'makom kadosh. So now that uncovers a new mystery. Our Mishnah told us that four of the tefillahs have to be in the azara, in a special mikveh that was in the azara. How do you know that? Why couldn't he use the same mikveh he used before? The teretz is because since the Torah, when it described kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, it uses the lashon that would really refer to tefillah. It's to teach us that the same place where kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is done, which is in the azara, that's where the tefillah has to look good. Rabbi Yehuda kiddush minolei. How does Rabbi Yehuda know kiddush? He uses this pasuk to teach you tefillah. That's the more not claiming to Rabbi Elazar Shimon. He uses the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Elazar Shimon. Madach on a regular day where you don't have tefillah, you have kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. On a day where you have tefillah like in Kippur, surely you should need kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. And that's just one. How do you know two? So the Gemara says, because it says upashat v'lovash. What are you gonna take off? Of course you're gonna take off what you put on. So we learn that you need two kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, one for taking off and one for putting on. Amar Chisna. Had the Rebbe's halacha, mafkami der Meir, mafkami der Rabbanan. Rebbe could not be consistent, not with Reb Meir and not with Rabbanan. Why is that? Mafkami der Rabbanan. The reason why it can't be consistent with the Rabbanan is the Rabbanan army, the Rabbanan that we said yesterday, said kishu lovish mekadesh. When do you make kiddush yadayim v'raglayim the second time? After you're fully dressed. But the Amar, now Reb Chisda is understanding the way Rebbe learns these psukim. It's very literal. So let's look back and focus on Rebbe's limud. It says upashat v'rochatz v'lovash. So we learn from here that the v'rochatz is going back on the earlier upashat, and the v'rochatz is going on the later v'lovash. But the rechita is in between the pshita and levisha, which would indicate that the first kiddush yadayim v'reglayim would be done after the kohen got undressed, and the second kiddush yadayim v'reglayim would be done before the kohen gets dressed, which means immediately before he goes into the mikveh and immediately after he leaves the mikveh. That will be inconsistent both with Reb Meir and the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon and Reb Meir both agree that the second kiddush yadayim v'reglayim is done after the kohen is fully dressed. The Yu Amar, but the way Rebbe seems to be learning is kishu poshit mekadosh, kishu poshut mekadosh. He makes kiddush yadayim v'reglayim before he gets dressed, so that's why he would be inconsistent with the Rabbanon. Umafkami the Reb Meir, and he's doubly inconsistent with Reb Meir. The Reb Meir Amar hach kiddush basra kishu lovosh mekadosh. The second kiddush yadayim v'reglayim is done after he's dressed. The Yu Amar kishu poshit mekadosh, and he holds that the kiddush yadayim v'reglayim is done when the person is not dressed. That's what Rebbe holds. So let's go back. I wasn't clear on the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon holds that the first kiddush yadayim v'reglayim is done before the kohen got undressed. Reb Meir holds that the first kiddush yadayim v'reglayim was done after the kohen got undressed. Reb Chisda says in Rebbe that Rebbe holds that the kiddush yadayim v'reglayim was done after he got undressed, which would be consistent with Reb Meir, not with the Rabbanon. And the second half is not consistent with either one, because both Reb Meir and the Rabbanon hold that the second kiddush yadayim v'reglayim is done after the kohen was dressed. Yet Rebbe seems to say that the second kiddush yadayim v'reglayim was done before he got dressed. Fine, and that's what the Gemara remains. According to Reb Chisda, Rebbe would be inconsistent with Reb Meir or with Rabbanon. Amar Bacha B'Yaakov said another point. Hakoil Moedin, everybody agrees, B'Kiddush Sheni, by the second Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim, Shaloivesh, first he gets dressed, the Achach Makalish, and then he makes Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim, which is consistent with what we just said from Reb Meir and the Rabbanon. How do I know that? My timer, the Amrkra Oy Begishtam El HaMizbeach. It says you make Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim right before you go to the Mizbeach. So therefore we learn, Misha Einim Mechutzer Elagisha. If someone, all he needs to do after the Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim is to go to the Mizbeach, that's how it's supposed to be. If you learn that he does Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim before he's dressed, then he can't go straight from Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim to the Mizbeach. He has to first get dressed. So that was the halacha that Rabbi Acha B'Yaakov said. On that, Amol Rabbi Acha B'Rei Rabbi or Rav Ashi, Lo Rav Chisda Isla Rav Acha. Rav Chisda cannot possibly be consistent with Rav Acha, because Rav Chisda clearly said in Rebbe that he got dressed he got dressed after the Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. According to the way Rav Chisda understood Rebbe, is first he does Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim and then he gets dressed. According to Rav Acha, clearly he's doing Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim after he got dressed. Rav Acha is Rav Chisda, and Rav Acha cannot hold Rav Chisda, which means Rav Acha can hold that he did Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim before he got dressed and after he got dressed. Clearly, Rav Acha said that he does do Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim after he got dressed. But the question is, maybe Rav Acha would agree to Rav Chisda that he did a third Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim before he got dressed, or before he got dressed, a Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim, and after. You can't say that. You know why? Then that would mean every time he changed clothing, he had to do 3 Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. He had to do one when he took off the clothing, one before he put on his new clothing, and one after he put on his new clothing. That would have been 15 Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim per day, and our Mishnah and our Gemara says there were only 10, so therefore we know that Rav Chisda and Rav Acha are also incompatible. So at the end of the day, we have so many different shitas. We have a machlokes between Rav Meir and the Rabbanon. If the first Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim was done before he got undressed, which is what the Rabbanon hold, or after he got undressed, which is what Rav Meir holds. We have a machlokes, but a second Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim, where both Rav Meir and the Rabbanon agree it was after he was dressed. Yet Rebbe, according to Rav Chisda, seems to say it was before he was dressed. And then we have Rav Acha, who says it was for sure after he was dressed. And that takes care of the whole sugya of how you know there were 5 tefillas, how you know that there were 10 Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim, and when each of these 10 Kiddush yadayim v'reglayim were. And with that, we can call it a day.